So I have the esteemed pleasure of being in conversation with the one and only Sarra Idris. Sarra, it's really wonderful to be reconnected. I know you and I first connected, trying to remember the years now, it's 2016, 2017, at the Arab American National Museum's Arab Film Festival. I think that was the first time we had connected.
Yes, yeah, it was Cinetopia. My short film was, I was so delighted that it was chosen to be as part of the lineup. And I remember, I think it was closer to 2015, 16, because I flew in with my child at the time. He's 6 now, and he was, I think, maybe a year at that point. So I remember I had him in tow, and he was in the back with my husband during the screening. And I was like, please, I hope he doesn't cry. So, so for me, it's a very vivid memory. Yeah.
That's true. He was a little guy. He was in the stroller. Yeah. Oh, that's crazy how time flies. Well, it's wonderful to be reconnected with you, and I really appreciate, just selfishly, I really appreciate like when I can continue to be in connection and community with folks that we have that here at the museum, or I personally have like connected. So it's really nice to keep you in the orbit and to continue to work with you. And we've done a couple of other things since that first film screening back in 2015, 2016. And now here we are doing another conversation about you and your amazing work and all the things that you have your hands in. I know you're a very busy person, so I'm really excited that you took the time to connect with me for this intimate conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Sarra, I always kind of like to start off with kind of like big picture, I guess, and then kind of get into some of the nitty gritty specifics. So I know you have a lot under your belt, right? You have a lot of experience in just like film in general, right? I know you've done work as an editor, director, artist. You've recently done a beautiful project for the Arab American National Museum, which we're unveiling hopefully very soon. And we're going to talk a little bit more kind of about those projects in detail a little bit later. But one thing I think that's interesting is you call yourself like an image maker. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that means to you specifically?
Yeah. I mean, listen, my path, or the path I've taken in my life was not something I foresaw at all. So when I describe myself as an image maker, it's the one thing that I see that has connected me from my childhood, likes and passions till now. I was born in Khartoum, Sudan. I came here around the age of 8. And, at the age of 6, 7, if you told me that my life would completely change and I would come to America, like I had no idea. And even when we came here, we thought we would go back every year because my father's job was, the contracts were being renewed. So, I just always loved to draw. I loved arts. I loved images. I love light, just how light fell on objects. And so, my creative journey was that I was I was into drawing, and then I got into photography. Then I got into collage. And at some point I was like, I want to play with the moving image. This was after college. So I got into video. And from there I got into advertising, and then got into, doing short film. And then back into directing. So, I also did photo editing and design at one point. So when I look back at my life and I think of what is it that really I've always loved, it's the image. It's how you make an image. It's the composition of it, whether it's moving or still. And it's, the idea, I call it like the magic. Like I'm an image maker, but I'm really kind of like a magic chaser, like it's something about when you see an image or when you see something that speaks to you, that is beautiful. And I think that's kind of what no matter what you give me, I'll craft something of it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, you're definitely a triple threat, a quadruple threat, like with everything that you're doing. And I love that it all kind of stems from like being an image maker, like kind of like stemming from that image, and then obviously from there you build from that, and you've obviously gotten into like different mediums and of course film. You mentioned that you are from Khartoum in Sudan. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, and I may have insight because we've screened the film Adam and Hawa, which is a beautiful film, and then obviously the work that we did very recently. Obviously, Sudan plays a bit of a role there. Can you talk to me a bit about how Sudan and like just your cultural connection, linguistic connection, and all these other connections have influenced the work that you do? And I may ask you an unfair follow-up question after that, as a heads up.
Sure. It's funny, in the most recent film that we did for you guys, I interviewed a woman, a friend of mine as well, named Hala Adam, and she says that, being African or Sudanese is her point of origin. And I think that's kind of what it is for me. It is influenced and it's in the fabric of everything I do. It's the lens I see the world from. And also, I came here at 8, but we used to go back religiously until 16, 17. So really my formative years and my family, which I'm still close to. And up until recently, before the revolution, I used to go back out, at least like every, 2 years, 1 year, 2 years or so. So it's really, I love Sudan. It's the generosity of the people, the abstract images, the light, the colors of Sudan, the layers of between the women's tobes, and there's just so much. It's visually so layered, even between just the sand and the houses and the rickshaws and the people walking and the languages and the skin tones. It really is a gorgeous mix of just so many things, ideas, philosophies, religions. And up until recently, that was really a beautiful home for all of that. So Sudan influences me greatly. And I think, I still think in Arabic, but I speak English more. My Arabic has dwindled. I'm fluent, but nowhere near what I could have been, I guess, or if I'd stayed. But there's expressions and things you just don't have in English to express. So sometimes I still say things, just so it's at my core, really. It's kind of like the fabric I was woven from. And then New York, I realized, or America raised me, but my core is Sudan. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarra. Thank you for sharing a little bit more in depth about, your connection to Sudan. And I think, from what you were saying, a lot of folks have that, like, even though, like, for me, myself, my family's from Lebanon, and even though we came like 100 years ago, which is a bit different from your experience, where there's still some type of connection. For some, it's a little bit weaker, like myself, and others, it's much more real, and it definitely can influence the work that we do, whether it's on the daily or, in like art projects or whatever the case is. Can you talk to me a little bit about the film industry in Sudan? I curate film at the museum. And I've been like super excited by a lot of the films that have been coming out of Sudan. And obviously this is not like a recent thing. Like there's always been a film industry in Sudan, but I know sometimes it's kind of like, it grows and then it kind of wanes a little bit, just like with any film industry. Can you talk to me a little bit about the film industry in Sudan and kind of the things that are happening with that?
Sure. I'm so proud and excited about the stuff and the work that's coming out of Sudan, especially, in film. So we've had a film industry and, 60s, 70s. And then in the late 80s, due to the coup, they shut down a lot of cinemas, so many social aspects to Sudanese life that included, gathering spaces and clubs, et cetera. And cinema suffered. And even to see foreign films, the most that you would see are mostly like older films. At that point, it was like either videotape and stuff, and then it became, like Indian films or imported films. Around 2010 or 2011, through some of the NGOs and through some of these, I think like German, I think it's called Goethe Institute, there was a lot of training, and they started kind of training young folk again about cinema. And there's been an influx since then. I mean, it's so rich with stories, and people have gone through so much in the last like 30 years that people have hit the ground running. I credit Sudan Film Factory greatly because they've trained a lot of people. And some of the films like You Will Die at 20 was produced by some folks from there. Basically, any major film coming out of Sudan, Sudan Film Factory has somehow helped shape either some of those people and or promoted them. Film festivals have now picked up, and now within a few years, it's, there's international recognition. So, so we've had an older history of incredible filmmakers, but there was a lapse in time, and then again, like the 2010s forward, there's been a leap and a burgeoning scene there. And I'm so happy. There's men and women. Women, I think some who you might have actually screened some of their films. So I'm super excited and proud of all of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's some amazing stuff coming out from Sudan, and then also like the diaspora around like the world. There's just like amazing stuff. So thank you for giving us a history lesson and shedding a little bit more light on some of the amazing things happening in Sudan film wise. So Sarra, getting back to you a little bit more specifically, I know you kind of alluded to this in the first kind of question about like the image maker. Can you talk a little bit more, I guess, about your interest in film specifically?
So film specifically, I think it's the culmination of all of the senses, right? So I've always loved storytelling, and it's in a way the most complete way to tell a story. Not the only way, because no matter what it is you're doing, with a photograph has a story, collage has a story. Anything you make really does have a story. But film for me is just kind of this beautiful mix of it. I've always liked music as well, and pace and rhythm. You really get to control the world. You're building worlds. You're building environments, and especially if it's something about emotions or a way to communicate ideas that might be much easier or better received through a film than in person or in talking. Or so it's just a beautiful medium. I've always been mesmerized by it. I know it's cliche. People say like when you go to the theater and the light hits, but honestly, I do that even no matter what film I watch now. Even I take my child, to kid films or whatever, I literally get giddy before the screen, goes black and we start the film. So there's just a special thing about it, I think. And the way to recreate reality, in a way is a really magical kind of power to have. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you have, this is kind of going in a different direction, but do you have a favorite position when it comes to film? I know you've been editor, director, you've played a lot of roles. Is there a specific aspect of film that you love being in, or do or do you just love everything about film? Is there, I guess, one position that you really enjoy? Like, do you love editing more, or do you appreciate like more of the director role, if that makes sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. It depends on the project, to be honest. I mean, there's times where I absolutely love editing. I mean, I've done it now almost 20 years. And there's times where I'm like, oh, I can't, like, I hate it, because it depends on the project and what's happening and my, my ability to help craft it. So really, I think I would say it really depends on the project. I just came off of a project that I did it was for Vice TV, and in collaboration with Adidas. And it was produced by a company called Religion of Sports. It was called Running While Black, which is an episodic series, kind of inspired by the Ahmaud Arbery case. And it's joyous. It's about people who love running, but the different, things they face. Black people who love running in America.
A lot of the conversation around trans athletes within sport is around us competing just for those medals. I want people to understand that sport is so much more than just the medals that we win.
And so, I was editor on that. I did get a chance to help co-direct part of it, but I loved the stories that I discovered. And I went into it thinking like, okay, this is a great editing job. I like the story, but I really fell in love again with editing because they interviewed, it was documentary style. So they interviewed people, and I really got to help craft the story. And in doing so, I had, went into rabbit holes about some of these people and their lives. And then I felt this responsibility of then having to try within a short amount of time to, tell their story accurately. We were in contact with some of them. So I think it just depends on the story, really. And, and in that case, I was very happy to be the editor, just because it was allowed me to really make sure that the things that deserved light got light, and to really be a part of their life in a way, even though it's funny because I have these weird relationships with people when I edit something that they'll never know, right? It's like being a stalker in a way, because I've listened to them, I've studied their facial expressions, their tone, their cadence, how they speak. So I know how to cut it more naturally. And, they know nothing of me, right? So this weird relationship you develop sometimes. But so yeah, the short answer is it depends on the project.
And speaking of projects, you've certainly worked with a lot of like impressive folks. You were just mentioning Vice and Adidas. I know you've done work with Saturday Night Live, Google, Twitter, BBC America, and like, the list goes way beyond those. How did you get your start, I guess, in editing? How did you kind of like get into that realm initially?
I will give so much props to a good friend of mine, Sandra Dillon. So I got out of college, worked for a couple of years as a photo editor, and then I started to want to play with the moving image. Went to grad school, and in grad school, I met my friend Sandra, and that was a 2-year master's program at the School of Visual Arts. And then I was looking for work. I was doing different things. I did some editing, I did some graphic design, and she was like, listen, there's a company that needs an assistant editor. Would you do it? And I had done I started editing my own artwork, video artwork. And I remember one of my professors also, Graham Weinbrand, shout out to Graham, that was like, oh, you'd be a great editor. And I was like, oh my God, to do this for other people? No way, because I was obsessive about it. And, but those two people kind of, she called me, said, let's, come in and apply for this position, even though it was an assistant's role. Here I am with a master's. But I was like, it's a apprenticeship. Traditionally editing is an apprenticeship. So I was like, okay, let's do it. And my, encouragement from my teacher, who was like, I actually think you'd be a great editor. So I took a chance and I, started working. So, and working at a time full-time post-production house was how I got my exposure. But I started from the bottom. I was an assistant. I did all the stuff assistants do and logging and all that kind of stuff for a long time. But you develop connections, right? And with people who at the time are also assistants, either producers or worked for different houses. But we were lucky. We worked for a lot of the great advertising companies, like the big ones. And through that, I made relationships. And then 7 years in, I quit. And so what happened is I just called on some of those relationships later, some who had moved on to other companies, and they kind of brought me with them. And so I've been freelance now for, oh my gosh, maybe 10 years or so, which I've been very blessed that I've been able to maintain it, make new connections. And it's really a people game, like if you do good work and you're good to people, eventually people kind of call you back, and that, they recommend you to other people. But, it's the root of it though, was establishing myself in a company, in a field with people that they had the connections, right, that I eventually then made. And then, that grew from there.
Awesome. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. As a non-editor, I always have questions about editing. And I know, like, you and I both had kind of mentioned some of the folks that you had worked with. I'm interested in like the Saturday Night Live piece and how one edits something like that. Can you tell us a little bit about like editing, kind of like the opening montage for Saturday Night Live? How do you approach that? Like, how is that different from like a film, if you will?
Yeah. So editing for SNL was always, number one, a privilege. And two, it was a show that I grew up with that I, had gone in and out of watching over the years. But it's an iconic New York kind of establishment or, institution. And so what I didn't know as much is the crunch and of the deadlines that they have. I mean, they work every week. It's a new show. They start writing, I think, and sorry if I get this wrong, but from like Tuesday, by Wednesday, things are locked. And between Wednesday and Saturday, everything you see between costumes, the skits are refined, the guest hosts, so much of work happens. So kudos to everyone who works there. I work in a very, very small portion, but I've been around and I've seen, and it is unbelievable the level of skill some of these people have and how fast they can turn things around. So entering in, and I was able to do the opening credits, I didn't realize how fast things would move. And because they would shoot, they would shoot as late as Thursday, and we had to have a full piece by Saturday, right? So they would shoot, and depending on people's schedule, it'd be Thursday, sometimes it was Friday, sometimes it was Wednesday. So, and excuse me, it really depended on the lead actors or the cast members, I should say, their availability, their friends. We would start the thinking process. We work closely with a company called Pentagram much earlier, but the energy and the speed and the amount of talent and the amount of support you get is really amazing. And it's a high, because you just grind and you work. And up until they have rehearsal at 7 p.m. that night of the show, Lorne Michaels watches it then, right? And so he can either say, oh, I love it, and I've been very blessed to have that happen, or he could tear it apart. And then you're having to scramble. Other producers see it before. Other people kind of say, okay, this is in the ballpark of what I would think is good, but obviously has final word. So you're constantly, my nerves are like this, right? Up until showtime. And then the cast members have a say. They watch it at 7 p.m. before the show, and they can say, I love the way I look, or it's come back that I don't like this shot. I don't like the way I don't like this person in it, or because sometimes they're invited to bring their family members and friends. So and again, this is just the opening credits. I have a friend of mine, Adam, who actually did all the digital shorts and stuff, and he's amazing in his own right. But my little, participation in it is always amazing and fun and thrilling, and just really, it's just fun to be a part of it. I've been lucky to have done them since 2015 now, and we usually do the first setup, and then every year when they add new cast members and stuff, that they keep it. It's internally, it's done internally, but we usually set the tone for the main first one and then goes. So, yeah.
Wow. That sounds crazy, but in a really cool, high energy kind of way, as somebody who's not been in there, that sounds like a really interesting experience. Sarra, what do you think, students and young folks that are, interested in getting into this realm, what do you think they need to know in order to work in that kind of an industry?
This is a question I think a lot about now. The world has changed a lot. When I came in, it was an apprenticeship, like I said, where you came in as an assistant, you worked under someone. Things were more physical in terms of film. We used film more. Now everything's digital. And I think people now, students, and young folks have such access to filming and editing at home. Software is cheap. So I think the technical side, people will figure out. Honestly, I think it's the people side that I would say and encourage students to build, meaning understanding, because it's really all about vision, right? Whether you're going to be a director or an editor, there's two things. It's about vision and communication. You have to have a vision that's solid, that's also exciting for people. And then you also have to be able to sell it, and you have to be able to make sure that others understand it clearly. And people management, whether it's your actors or your editors or your lighting guy or your grip, you have to be able to know how to encourage people, but to keep them on track. And people go through good days and bad days. You'll go through good days and bad days. But making sure that if you're the director, you're at the helm, and you have hands in everything. So it's making sure that you are a representation of the vision you want, but also of the kind of work environment. You have a great deal of effect of the work environment that you create, and people will work with you and give you better work output based on that, based on the environment you create. And as the editor, it's really your job to listen. Like a great editor is invisible. My job is to not bring attention to myself. My job is to meld and be like, that was a great story, and that you would think about the editing. Unless you were in the industry, you would notice it, but to not really make you aware of what it is you're watching, to make you feel it. So as an editor, you're actually the opposite. You're being invisible. You're listening a lot. I always say I'm like a therapist. Like I'll listen to the director, I'll listen to what they shot, and listen to everyone else's vision, the producer, this and that. And I have to try to, make that happen for them. It's a more selfless job. It's not about, your opinion obviously matters, and it's important that you guide them to where you think they need to go. But it's really about what's best for that project. Sometimes, like I said, it's a project that you would love, and other times it's a project you would never want to normally be on, but that's, the name of the game. And so you have to develop a sense of what is best for the story, regardless of my own, opinions, and regardless of how hard it was. Like sometimes, to wrap it up, there's a saying, which is you have to be ready. And it doesn't age well, the saying, but you have to be ready to kill your babies. And what that really means is, sometimes the director was like, oh my God, it took us forever to get this shot. And I had, this much money and a crane and this and that. And as an editor, I have to be able to step back and say, okay, but it doesn't matter because that shot just doesn't work. And so you have to be able to say, like, I don't want to know necessarily the backstory of how hard it was. Does this make sense for the story you're trying to tell? So yeah, I think people management, strong vision, making sure that you listen and know your role, know your position.
So Sarra, we've talked a little bit about editing. I want to switch a little bit, just a question on like you as a director, and then we're going to get into a little bit more, a couple of nitty-gritty questions, and then we'll kind of conclude.
Okay.
As a director, what types of films do you like to make, and what are some of your inspirations for some of these projects that you've created?
I think the short answer would be just something impactful. I vary again. I'm lucky that I can do commercial work and then also sometimes my own personal kind of video artwork. So I just think something hopefully that's impactful, whether it's, and that can mean a myriad of things. Sometimes it's just visually beautiful things, and sometimes it's something with a message. But as long as I feel like it's something that is important either to me or to something that's going on in the world right now, it doesn't have to be serious. It's just something that I think, carries weight of some sort. I think that's kind of like the shortest answer I can give, the most concise. Yeah.
Given the state of the world in many aspects, as you know, as an Arabic speaker, as someone who identifies as a woman, can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you faced as a Arabic speaking female Sudanese American filmmaker in the film industry?
The biggest challenge is, at least when I started, there was no one like me that I saw. I'm sure there were somewhere, but that I, saw. I'm a Muslim, I'm Black, I'm African, I'm a woman, and, foreigner to this country, and I'm in America, which all those things are not things that they value. So, but at the same time, I knew I had a sense of myself because I came from, strong people. I came from a heritage that I understood fully. And so it was really more about understanding first this country and the way that it treats its citizens and people of different backgrounds and, orientations. And that was a learning lesson. And I learned that young. And thankfully to my parents, they always made me feel like they're wrong. They're not the ones who, have traveled. They haven't really understood the world. They're not welcoming. And so it's not your burden in a way. It's like you'd be you and travel through the world. But it I don't know, it gave me this kind of attitude of kind of brushing it off and just focusing on the things that I love. Now I know everyone comes from different backgrounds. Everyone's going to have different entry points to it. But for me, I stopped to think about it every once in a while. I faced a lot of, just ignorance, I'll call it, from a very young age, in this country. I don't speak with an accent because when I came, I was young, but I had to learn English. I learned English here in the US. So, oftentimes people don't know what to make of me. Is it just, African American, Caribbean, which I welcome all. I love all Black people. But it's interesting that what people say to you and the assumptions they make about who you are. So I've had to face a lot of, and also just in a room with people that don't understand, me at all and or projects, and sometimes being asked at companies to go address the Black intern because they want to fire them or they're afraid because they might do something. And I'm like, things are just ridiculous things. But I don't know. I think for me, I've always, at the end, people are people. And I think ignorance is combated with getting to know people, knowledge, and one-on-one. And there's some it's just not. I mean, this country now, we've realized there's some people, you can show them the truth in their face and they still won't believe you. But I think as long as you believe in the things you want to do, and that you yourself know what is intrinsically right, and your actual right as a human being, no matter how you identify, no matter where you're from, no matter what language you speak, no matter what gender you identify with, I think, moving in that and knowing that I belong wherever I want to be, and making sure that you keep good people around you, that are honest as well. And then you just move forward. There's to be honest, there's really no other option, is there? The other option is to just cower and wait, and then you lose your life, you lose your opportunity. So I say just, stand in the things you believe are true, and you're going to face them, but know that you have everything within you to face those things. And sometimes you lean on good people around you, and that's why it's important to keep those, good people around to help you through.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Definitely stay true to who you are and don't let anybody influence you. And like you said, otherwise you lose your life, you lose your shine, you lose your uniqueness, you lose your soul, essentially. So I think that's really good advice for a lot of younger folks who are kind of going through the same types of issues. So I think that's some really, really good advice for folks who, whether you're in the film industry or not, are facing a lot of not unprecedented, but it seems a bit more blunt. The curtains have opened, I suppose. There's not as much hiding as before. So it's
a crazy time. I mean, before, put the pandemic aside, and that's a huge one, right? But that in itself, and all the, the recent decisions that have been made with the Supreme Court, and then gun violence, and just economy and education, and it's a lot for young folks to deal with. And it's funny because even when you were asking me earlier, this is something I was talking to my husband about. I'm like, the idea of even editors now that are starting again, for me, editing, really the part of it that's apprenticeship is for someone to be there to tell you the things, that are wrong or right, to how do you develop people's skills if you're not in the same room with people, if you're ever doing everything remote. Meaning my last probably 5 jobs I've done from, or more actually, have done, remotely. I've hardly met any of the people I've worked with. You know what I mean? It's maybe some through Zoom. Sometimes they have their cameras off. So I don't even know who I'm dealing with sometimes, but you're doing work. And so how do you, if you haven't had that, in a way, education or experience, how do you gain that in a world like right now that we're living in? So there's different challenges. At the same time, I think that maybe I have older mindsets. I mean, we grew up at a time that was different from, our parents. And so people adapt. Kids are very adaptable, and they'll make up their own paths. But I think, bringing it down to the core of just the belief in the things that you think are true. As long as, you're not hurting anyone else, then live your life, and make the most that you can of it.
I have just 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about you as a teacher, because I know you have teaching as a part of your story, your background. And then I'd like to close with some work that you're doing and how we can kind of stay in touch with you. So
Sure.
in terms of teaching, can you talk about how you got into that and where you're teaching?
Currently, I'm teaching at the School of Visual Arts in the MFA program, the photography, video, and related media program. It's the same program that I actually attended many years ago for my master's. And I'm in complete love with teaching in a way that I didn't realize. I had taught before workshops. I also took some time in 2011, I think it was, to go teach in Sudan with another NGO in Khartoum and in Kosti. I did video and editing there as well. And throughout the years, I've either like mentored or taught, like, again, workshops in the States. But this is now I'm faculty, and it was like this past semester, or sorry, past year, both in the fall and the spring, was the first like full-time kind of all year gig that I did. So yeah, I love it. And it was something where the chair of my department had asked me initially to come on to do some workshops during the, the pandemic. And to be honest, it was the only thing in life I really hadn't sought. Like, I was happy to do the workshops, and I guess maybe they were in a way trying to see how I would do. And they eventually offered me the position. It wasn't something that I, was thinking that was going to happen. And so of all the things I've done in life, honestly, it's the only thing that I get giddy about, because very young, when I was very young, I remember always thinking, like, even though I didn't know where, like I said earlier, where my life would end up, I always thought, like, at some point in my life, I would like to teach, but I always thought much later, because I'd need to have knowledge to teach, and I'd need to and so when that happened, it was just like a great feeling, because it was something that is the only thing I actually ever thought I would do. But it was also one of the only things I didn't seek, like everything else I had to kind of fight for, or kind of figure out my, where I was going. But I also realized how much I loved it, and how important teachers are, and the true impact that teachers have, and how much just listening and really trying to, guide someone, but genuinely for what they, what's best for them. It's a role that I think is, I take very seriously, but also I think is, very important, when you look at a person's life, and how they feel about themselves, in every aspect, whether it's self-esteem to where they see their future. So yeah, so I think the most of teachers, I think it's a very, very important role, and I think we should pay them more in general.
Hear, hear. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for the amount, the amazing impact that teachers are doing, like, yeah, it's, well, that could be a whole nother part too.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I mean, the work you're doing is amazing. I mean, you're making an impact in like so much that you're doing, whether it's like, as a teacher, as a filmmaker, as inspiration for young, or folks in general who are Arabic speakers, or Sudan, or Black, or, Muslim, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for all the amazing work that you have done and you continue to do. I always like to conclude with this question. I'm lucky because I have access to you in terms of your emails, but like, how, for folks who would like to get connected to you or see more, or learn more about your work, can you share what you're working on, and then how we can follow you and stay connected to you?
So some of the work that I'm doing right now, I just mentioned doing the Vice TV and Adidas collaboration for Running While Black. That should be airing right now. I did episode 2 of the 3 episodes. And also there is, I'm excited about Colors of the Sun. That's going to premiere soon with the Arab American National Museum. And that is more of a personal piece about being a Sudanese immigrant in America. And then I'll be teaching in the fall as well, still at the School of Visual Arts, which I'm very excited about. And then there's some, few projects here and there that are not out yet, some more personal work, and then like a larger kind of episodic piece that's going to come out soon about some music in America. So I have my hands still in different pots, but please, for people who want to reach out, You can reach me at Made in Sudan. That's the handle for my Instagram. And also I have my website, which I need to update, but it has some of the old work on there. And I'll be updating it soon, more current work, both commercial and personal. My website is www.sarraidris.com or sarraidris.com, spelled SARRAIDRIS. And that can keep you up to date with some of the moves I'm making. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarra.
Thank you.
Cannot endorse you and your work enough. If you have not seen Adam and Hawa, find it somewhere. I also have some homework to do. I just brought up Running While Black on a web tab while we were talking, and I have some homework to do to watch that myself in the very near future. But no, thank you again, Sarra, so much. It's wonderful to connect with you again. And thank you everybody for watching our conversation with the one and only amazing Sarra Idris. Yeah, thanks everybody so much.
Thank you. I will say this. Thank you for always being very supportive. Since I met you, you've been nothing but supportive and always reaching out and letting me know of opportunities. And honestly, that's what we need. We need more allies of all kinds, people to just say, hey, did you know about this? Or you really should, enter in this or do this. At times, even when I was like, I don't know, Dave, I don't know if I can do it. So I genuinely mean that. So again, it's good to have good people around you, and I, include you as one of those. So I genuinely say thank you for all the opportunities you've provided and always, promoting work. And if anyone I've ever introduced you to, even you've done the same. So I think thank you for being a generous soul. I genuinely appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm gonna cash in all that praise and like cash it in for like a one-on-one personal workshop. Look for that email.
I'll welcome it.
But no, on a serious note, thank you, Sarra. That means a lot. And I think I echo to the keeping good folks around you that don't take but can help uplift you. And I appreciate those kind words. So thank you.